Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered, the podcast that takes the mystery out of commercial real estate and makes it accessible for everyone. I'm Caleb David, a broker, investor, and community builder with over a decade of experience helping businesses and individuals bring their visions to life. Here we break down the market, share expert insights, and talk about the opportunities that commercial real estate creates for businesses and communities alike. No fluff, no gatekeeping, just real, unfiltered conversations that empower you to navigate the space with confidence. So whether you're an investor, a business owner, or simply curious about commercial real estate, welcome. Let's dive in. Welcome everyone to the CRE Unfiltered podcast with your host, Caleb David. I'm excited today to have a guest on that is actually, we've crossed paths in the past in some of my continuing education journeys. Gene Trowbridge is a CCIM. He's also an attorney. He's nationally respected as an attorney and real estate syndication expert with decades of experience in both law and commercial investment. As the founder of Trowbridge Law Group, LLP, Gene has guided clients through acquisitions, group investing, lease negotiations, and legal compliance. With deep expertise in securities law, he's also author of a book called It's a Whole New Business, a practical guide to real estate syndication, and he's offering you, our listeners, a free copy of that book today. So Gene, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Caleb. It's nice to see an old student and be an old teacher. So what the heck? It's great.
That is awesome. So you taught the first course that I took at CCIM. We were just talking before the show. It was in San Diego, a beautiful campus, really difficult course, but also very valuable and informative to my career. So I want to thank you for the investment you've put into so many students like me in the past. So maybe let's start off with CCIM. What is it and how do people get involved?
CCIM, it stands for Certified Commercial Investment Member. That's a designation you get. And the CCIM Institute is part of NAR, but it's the part of NAR that has networking and education for commercial investment brokers, dealing with people who deal with investments, people who deal with leasing, people who deal with supply and demand analysis.
Yeah.
Of various projects. So it's an all-encompassing designation. And I think there are 15,000 of them who actually have the PIN throughout the country. And probably, my guess is probably 5 times more than that of people who've gone through all the courses, but for one reason or another didn't get the designation. Many corporations require their people to take the CCIM education program, and then they leave it to the person if they want to take the time off and pay the money themselves to be a member. So that's why there's so many people who don't follow through because it just doesn't work for them. But it's a great organization, and I go to more meetings as a CCIM member than I do as a member of the Orange County Bar Association. Who wants to sit there for an hour with a bunch of attorneys?
I appreciate that. You mentioned in your bio that you are an expert in security. So let's start there. What is a security and why do real estate professionals need to understand this distinction?
That is important, and that's why my book is called It's a Whole New Business. And I wrote the first edition of my book way back when, just for really the CCIM Institute as additional education, because we don't talk about securities in the classes. And I think people need to know that, because when you're out doing business, one of the things that happens when you want to get a listing or sell a property, you research the title, and generally it's owned by some entity.
Yeah.
An LLC, a corporation, or whatever. Well, that means there's a bunch of investors. There's just not one investor. And so when there are a bunch of investors in a deal and they invest their money in anticipation of a profit, someone else runs their money and is in charge of the money. The government has an interest in protecting those investors and therefore the securities laws. So the very simple, plain English definition of a security, and it's much more than just real estate, it's everything you can think of when investors are pooled together, is an investment of money in a common enterprise with an anticipation of a profit through the efforts of someone else. And that's really what makes it the security,
Yeah.
Caleb, through the efforts of somewhere else,
Yeah.
someone else. So that's what I wanted to tell people. And when I was starting out in the business, I was a syndicator. I was a sponsor of deals, putting people together for about 20 years.
Okay.
And I learned all about the securities laws there, but I knew that many of the other people in my CCIM world did not know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's important to know. Very first thing, you can have one investor, and if you're in charge of the money, it's a security.
Yeah. Well, that's a great explanation. I appreciate that. But what are some common mistakes that brokers or investors make, and how can they avoid some legal pitfalls?
The first common mistake, of course, is to not think it's a security. There are all sorts of rumors out there. I get calls all the time. I call them homework calls. People call me and say, "Hey, I want to put together a deal, and I know if there's less than 5 investors, I can do it." Blah, blah. No, that's not the rule. Or I want to put together a deal if it's just friends and family,
Yeah.
and I know that's not a security. And I say, no, that's not the rule.
Yeah.
So the first mistake is putting together a group and moving forward and not understanding that it is a security, and probably hiring a lawyer. Not every lawyer does securities work because it's a special area. Like, I don't do wills and trust and divorces and medical malpractice. So the securities laws is a very separate thing. And the E&O insurance that you buy as a securities lawyer is
Right.
very expensive. So not
Yeah.
everyone has that. So
Yeah.
that's a big mistake. I think another mistake is not having enough time to put together the deal.
Mhm.
When you're out there trying to do a transaction, Caleb, there are people competing for that
Yeah.
property.
Yeah.
And some of them have 1031 money, some of them have all sorts of money in the bank,
Yeah.
and you get stressed to have a short escrow. You can't do that in the securities world generally. You need maybe a 60-day escrow
Okay.
to make it happen.
Yeah.
Some things I've seen over my years is the sponsor isn't totally forthcoming in what the facts are of the transaction, because if he or she were totally forthcoming, they might not be comfortable that they'd raise enough money. So they just don't tell everything. That's a mistake. The problem with the securities laws is, as opposed to being just a broker where you really never take the money of the investor,
Right.
Caleb,
Yeah.
in the securities world, you take the money.
Mm.
So now we're in the world of fraud
Yeah.
and misrepresentation. So you have to be very careful. So there's all sorts of mistakes that people make. But I think the biggest one is just not really dealing with the fact that you've just entered a new world of
Right.
securities law, and follow the rules, stay out
Yeah.
of jail.
Yeah. That's helpful. That's
I
really
think
helpful.
so.
What are some key triggers that real estate professionals can look for in some common deal structures?
One of the things I think they have to look for is continuity.
Mm.
Caleb, if you were going to present an offering to me and you wanted me to invest my $50,000, I might say, "Gee, that's a great offering, Caleb. I'd like to invest there, but what if something happens to you?" So I always think the first thing an investor should look at is the continuity plan of the sponsor. And
Mm.
I think the sponsor should be ready for that question.
Yeah.
It's not really a legal question, because you could be the manager all by yourself. That's
Right.
fine. But it's a marketing question. And I don't think it's fair to the investors if we put just Caleb alone in charge. We've just gone through COVID. I
Right.
mean, say we've just gone through COVID, but it's still around, isn't it?
Yeah.
And people get sick.
Yeah.
One example, not necessarily worrying about you dying or anything, but there are things that happen. You get in a lawsuit, you get divorced, you get in a car accident and you're laid up for 6 months. Who's going to run the project? So I think that's a major thing that people need to look at. And I think another thing is the waterfall. What is the way that you are going to describe the
Mm.
distribution of the benefits that come from your project
Yeah.
to the investors? And we CCIMs and CCIM candidates, we can get pretty esoteric.
Yeah.
IRR and FMRR and all that stuff. And not everyone understands that.
Yeah.
So we have to be a little careful in what we put in our documents so that the public understands.
Yeah.
Because if they don't understand, they won't invest.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I think is important, Caleb, is when you buy a piece of real estate yourself, you always think about your exit strategy.
Right.
And you need to do that as a syndicator. What's the plan? What's the optimum holding period? What is there? Is there a bridge loan that's going to come due, or do we have to refinance? What is going to happen? Are there major tenant is going to move out after 8 years? What's going to happen that will trigger some sort of an exit strategy? And I think you need to know that. One thing I haven't mentioned is the reason anyone becomes a syndicator, a sponsor, is one of two things. They have the money to buy a piece of real estate that they like, but they don't want to use all of their own money to buy it.
Yeah.
Maybe because that'll be the only piece they can buy.
Yeah.
Or they don't have the money.
Yeah.
And they see a piece of real estate that they'd like to buy. And what they'd like to do, Caleb, is they'd like to present the opportunity to the people they know to invest in something that they've found. And it's not really selling. It's just, hey, Caleb, I found this deal.
Yeah.
I think there's an opportunity here. You're not buying real estate on your own. You don't have the time, the money, the expertise, but I do. And invest with me and we'll go forward. And that's why you become syndicators. That's why I became a syndicator. My first deal, I found an apartment building way back when in St. Paul that I wanted to buy. And I didn't have the money. So I reached out to 3 fellas I'd gone to college with and we bought it. And all of a sudden I learned I was in the securities business.
Yeah. No, and I think this is one thing I tell my listeners all the time, the importance of having an expert on your side, having that attorney that understands the ins and outs of all of this, because if you walk into it ignorant, I assume you run into some compliance risks. And if that's the case, what are some of those potential risks?
Rescission is the big risk. If it's found that you've done something wrong, the investor may have the right to ask for all their money back and statutory interest on the money while you've had the money. And that's difficult if the money's either been stolen or is already in a building.
Yeah.
How do you bail the people out? And so that's a risk. And of course, if you're doing intentional, fraud is intentional, but if you're doing fraud, you and I have heard on the news of people going to jail.
Yeah.
As my wife says, why would anyone invest with a man whose name was Madoff? And we saw Mr. Madoff go to jail for a very long time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what you have to do. You have to be careful about following the rules. Once again, you have the investor's money.
Yeah.
You're in charge of it to actually do better with that money than with your own money. It's the rules.
Yeah. Makes sense. And so obviously this is a huge topic and can possibly be overwhelming for our listeners. So how would you say is the best way for them to stay informed about this topic without having a law degree? Are there resources?
Well, study. First of all, if you're going to do a deal, you just absolutely have to have a securities attorney do the paperwork. I've been an expert witness a few times in court where it's obvious that the person did it themselves, and that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
That's not acceptable. So I think that's important. And then there's unlimited information. We have maybe over 15 years YouTube videos on our YouTube channel, and many other attorneys have it. So there's all sorts of ways to research. But you don't want to be the attorney. You want to hire the attorney. You want to be in the real estate business, Caleb.
Correct.
And unfortunately, what this business does very quickly is put you more in the people business. If you've just been a broker, you're selling property, you're finding tenants, or you're placing loans, that's fine. The transaction comes, it closes, you go away.
Right.
Here you take 20 people and all their money for the next 5 years.
Right.
And you do that 5 times, you've got 100 investors. All of a sudden, it's a people business. One of the things that caused me to leave the business is one year I sent out 1,687 K1s.
Oh my God.
Representing I had about between 800 and 900 investors, and many were in 2 deals. And that was just an overwhelming burden. The representing investors can be cumbersome.
Yeah.
And there's always more risk than you think. When we were doing apartment deals in 2000 and 2001, we didn't write in the documents that there was a risk that a pandemic was going to come along and people were not going to pay their rent. You couldn't inspect the units. You couldn't do anything. And in 2002, 2003, we didn't in the offerings that interest rates were going to go from 3 to 7 in 13 days because we didn't know that there was going to be a collapse. And that was happened way back in 2000. Excuse me, in 2008.
Yeah.
When the tenant in common industry fell apart because the banks all of a sudden stopped raising money or stopped lending money.
Lending money. Yeah. So was that one of the things that kind of inspired you to kind of transition from being a syndicator
Oh, yes.
to an attorney?
From 1977 to 1974, you can think I went through a period where interest rates were 13, 14, and 15. I went through the Tax Reform Act of 1985. I went through the collapse of the market in 93. There's always more risk than you anticipate.
Yeah. But I would also imagine with the risk also comes some advantages in doing syndication. What are some of the advantages?
The advantages is you can get involved in deals that you can't do yourself.
Yeah.
Advantage and from a sponsor.
Yeah.
And from an investor, the money and the time and the expertise it takes to own your own real estate is missing in many investors. So here's how they can go. Now, let me tell you this, what we're talking about is private placements. We're not talking about going to Wall Street and raising money. We're just talking about private placements where you can do it without full SEC regulation. Last year, and that was a down year, the private placement market, Caleb, was over $3 trillion.
Wow.
Twice as much as was raised on Wall Street in IPOs.
Yeah.
So it's a huge business.
Yeah.
And there's just all sorts of things. I've done hockey teams, I've done fiber optic companies, I've done medical equipment production companies, avocado groves, a chain of salons. There's all sorts of reasons that people need equity.
Yeah.
And after they get the money from their bank account, their parents' bank account, and the bank, they're still short. So now they have to go out and find investors.
Right. Yeah. So what are some of the things that you wish you knew when you started in syndication?
One of the things I learned that while I was doing it is you don't have to have a deal on the street all the time.
Yeah.
I always thought you did because there were competitors out there. Now, my money raising, Caleb, was a little different. For the most part, I use broker dealers to raise my money.
Okay.
And so I thought, if I don't have a deal on the street now, some other client sponsor is going to go in there and the reps are going to meet that sponsor and put their investors in that deal.
Yeah.
And while I'm sitting on the sideline. So I think in one or two instances, we probably pulled the trigger on a deal a little too quickly. That's something. And I think another thing you learn is you never sign individually on a recourse loan.
Yeah.
That's something that you need to learn. And of course, the burden of having all these investors is certainly overwhelming.
Yeah.
Those are the three things that I think I wish I had known.
Yeah.
But back then, when I was syndicating, I ended syndicating in 94. There were no platforms. Today, there's platforms where they'll do all the paperwork for you, and it's much easier. They'll send out the checks. They'll send out the K-1s. Much easier, but we didn't have that back.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you find today that your two careers, how they've merged, overlapped a little bit? How does that shape your use?
Well, perfect. I went to law school to do one thing,
Yeah.
to come out and be a real estate securities lawyer, because that's what I knew. I certainly wasn't going to go into medical malpractice or anything like that. It was a second career, and it was probably somewhat of a midlife adjustment.
Yeah.
And so I came out and I hit the street running.
Yeah.
As soon as I passed the bar, I opened my office and I knew exactly what I needed. And I had the documents I needed to work with, and I had a reputation.
Yep.
And I was on my way.
Yeah.
So it's perfect. And I've been doing this now, Caleb, for 30 years, this
Wow.
part. It's,
Yeah, so you've seen trends come and go. You've seen the market do all sorts of things. What do you see for the future of real estate group investing?
the things I'm interested in right now is certainly watching the interest rates. And I don't know what's going to happen. You know, our interest rates now at maybe 6 to 7,
Mhm.
that's normal since I've been in the business for 50 years. I think if we went back and did some research, we'd find out that 7, 8% is a very normal interest rate.
Yeah,
But everyone's memory is when it was 2 or 3.
right.
So that's a problem. They don't remember.
Yeah,
Your parents probably bought a house when interest rates were double digits. I
right.
did,
Yeah,
but we don't remember that. But we do remember the 2 and 3%. So I think I'm watching interest rates.
yeah. So definitely is a matter of perspective. And I think even going back to what you said earlier about doing the research and going back and understanding historically where it's at, because a lot of the excuses I've been getting from my buyers and investors is interest rates. Obviously, the deal has to pencil, but I think a lot of people get caught up on that as the sole deciding factor. And I think you're right. It is a
Yeah,
normal
then
number.
that goes to affordability now.
Yeah.
If we remember from our CCIM instruction, traditionally cap rates are 3% more, 300 basis points more than the 10-year T-bill. That's generally what so if the T-bill is at 6 today, cap rate should be at 9. They're not.
Yeah.
They haven't gotten there. So that's holding people back
Yeah.
historically. The other thing I'm looking at is the provision of a change in the definition of accredited investor. Not to go into a long story, but the rule is generally if you have $1 million of net worth, or if you're single, filing an individual tax return and your income is 200,
Mm.
or you're married and your income is 300, the government considers that you can fend for yourself. So they call you accredited, and that gives you the ability to invest in all sorts of deals.
Gotcha.
Okay. When that rule was instigated in 1981, and it's still the same numbers, you can imagine what your net worth had to be in
Right.
1981 to be $1 million.
Right.
Things are changed. When that rule was instigated, 3% of the households in the United States were accredited.
Wow.
Today, it's close to 20.
Wow.
And the SEC thinks that's too many. As long as I've been involved in that, we keep hearing the SEC saying, we need to change that. We need to cut that back. That's going to affect capital formation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the SEC is also concerned about not affecting negatively capital formation. So they're between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
But that comes up every year. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing I'm seeing is binders.
Mhm.
There's always a question. Can I just introduce my friends to Caleb and have Caleb take my friends into his offering, and then can he pay me some fee? I
Yeah.
don't have a securities license.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is no. However, when President Trump was the first term, he proposed something to the SEC that would allow normal people just simply to introduce their friends to Caleb and to get a referral fee, not to analyze the deal or make recommendations, but just simply a finder. And that was voted down. But actually, this month, there's another hearing in the small business part of the SEC where they're going to revisit that. And why is that? Because now the SEC is driven by a Republican.
Hmm.
There's 3 people on the SEC commissioners panel, and before it was a Democrat, and that rule was, they didn't accept it. Now they want to look at it again. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, Caleb, because I think all the stockbrokers are going to fight.
Yeah.
And most of that 3 trillion is raised through the stock brokerage company. So
Yeah.
if they think their business is going to be damaged by the finder regulation, I think it'll not pass. But some of my friends who are in the business are already talking about, oh, it's going to pass, it's going to be great. Well, we'll see.
Yeah. Yes, we've talked a little bit of some of the challenges in these times right now, but are there also some opportunities that you see for investors?
I think I think the opportunity that syndicators and investors think they're going to see is a whole bunch of debt that's coming due in the next couple of years that has to be recycled. And with interest rates being higher and with the performance of properties maybe not being as great as we thought, people may have trouble refinancing. In the language I hear, there's going to be blood on the street.
Yeah.
I've heard that for 50 years.
Yeah.
Every time there's a big disaster, and it's always tied to financing, there's going to be blood on the streets. There really never has been. There's always been a way to resolve these issues, but there may very well be some good buys out there. I have a client who does nothing but search foreclosed apartment buildings. She'll go to the auction
Yeah.
with her check and buy buildings. That's all she does. And she thinks that market's going to heat up. She hasn't done a deal in a year.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe it isn't
Right.
heating.
Yeah, yeah. What do investors need to prepare for in the next 3 to 5 years? You mentioned the refinancing situation, but what are some other things they can do to prepare over the next 3 to 5 years?
I think let's talk about, it depends on what you're investing in, but this is a real estate call. So let's talk about product types.
Yeah. Yeah.
In office,
Hmm.
they're going to have to look at creative ways to reuse the space. Are people coming back to work in office buildings? Are they all I work virtually. I haven't had an office in many years, and
Yeah.
my firm has 6 people, and I'm the only one in Southern California. We're in Boston and Nashville and College Station. So we're all working virtual. That's another thing. Industrial is going to be a hot market because the industrial part of our economy is going to take off, and we're going to need more industrial spaces. As you drive down the freeway, are you surprised at these huge
Yeah.
industrial projects that
Yeah.
are being built?
Yeah.
Not everyone's leased by Amazon, but
Right.
many of them are.
Yeah.
So that's huge. I think apartments, unless they start building cheaper houses and the prices of houses go down dramatically, it's going to be cheaper to rent
Mm.
than it is to buy. So I think we're going to have a good demand for multifamily. I would
Yeah.
think that's good. Retail is kind of interesting. Will stores still be opening and will stores still be in business with the competition?
Yeah.
Malls are changing.
Yeah.
The internet I buy a lot of stuff on Amazon. I bet you do too.
Yeah.
When it's as easy to just drive down the street to Staples to buy a box of paper, I buy it on Amazon and it's delivered.
Right.
So I think that's a change. And the other industry that's always interesting to me is hospitality. Hospitality, are people going to travel? Now that COVID's gone, traveling is back. And are we going to travel overseas? I don't think so. I don't think that's going to grow. My industry, Caleb, was self-storage.
Yeah.
And that's what I did, basically built self-storage to sell to operators.
Yeah.
We were in the construction business, and houses are still small. There's not a lot of storage. Where are you going to put your
Right.
extra mattresses and your ski-doo and all that stuff? So
Yeah.
I think
Absolutely.
that's an industry that I would be watching.
Yeah, absolutely. Gene, I really appreciate your time. And as we wrap up, is there anything else last minute that you want to share about where people can find you? Any last parting words?
My website is a good place, and that's the entrance to all the things that I do. And the website is tnllp.com. And are you going to post that somewhere?
We will. Yep. So we've got
Okay,
it on
so
the
it's
screen
T
right
as
now.
in Tom, N as in Nancy, LLP.com. That's big. And then we have our YouTube channel is where there's a lot of education. And I think I have about 40 interviews with sponsors over the years that are there. That's called Trowbridge Talks.
Okay.
That's interesting. And if they go to the website, they can get a free PDF of my book. It's a whole new business. Happy to send that to you just by going to the website. And if you want a hard copy, you can always get it. Just pay for the shipping. And I also have Audible. I recorded my book. Talk about a boring 16 hours sitting there reading my own book. I did that, and that's available wherever Audible books are sold.
Awesome.
So at my website, if you want to just talk, consultations are free. There's a place where you can sign up for a half-hour consultation. I'd be happy to talk to you.
Awesome. We'll make sure we have all that information in the show notes. And Gene, it's just been a pleasure reconnecting with you and being able to share a very specific part of the market with our listeners. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Caleb, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks all for listening. We look forward to sharing another episode with you soon. That's a wrap on this episode of Commercial Real Estate Unfiltered. I hope you found value in today's conversation and feel more confident about navigating the world of commercial real estate. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with somebody who could benefit from these insights. You can connect with me, Caleb David, and the team at David Commercial Real Estate. Just check the show notes for more information. Thanks for listening, and remember, creating space is more than just real estate. It's about building community. See you next time.